Echo of Death, a Tom and Scott mystery, fifth book in the series. By Mark Richard Zubro, publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, narrator, Eric Ost. Acknowledgements. For their kind help and patience, Barb D'Amato, Hugh Holton, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekaiser Reed. Chapter 5. I awoke the next morning to Scott sitting on the side of the bed, his hand resting on my shoulder. I felt comfortably warm. He had dressed in the same clothes he had worn yesterday. He needed a shave and a shower, although his 5 o'clock shadow was incredibly sexy. I got up, dressed, and made a foray to the bathroom. It was the kind of space that it was better not to turn the light on in, much less inspect closely. It had only a toilet and a washstand. Where the tub might have been was a gaping space with a small circular hole in the ground where a pipe might once have been. I called the Hotel Chicago number the mystery man had left. Brad Stawalski was still registered at the hotel, but his room did not answer. No one at the desk knew where he was or when he might be in, but checkout time was noon, so he'd have to have contacted someone by that point. I left Glenn's name as the person who was calling. I tried the number for Mrs. Proctor. The answering service person, who had a nasal voice and should have been chewing gum, said that Mrs. Proctor was not in, but she had left a message that we could come by after 2 that afternoon and meet with her. I didn't like the idea of meeting anyone in a set place where a trap could be sprung on us. I wrote down the address. The lobby of the hotel was deserted. No one sat behind the registration desk. I paused at the door and searched the street. As I was about to open the door, I thought I caught a glimpse of a dark sedan with 2 men sitting in front, parked illegally half a block down. Trouble? Scott asked. I don't know, but let's not risk it. There's got to be a back way out of this place. The alley behind the hotel was as unsavory as the inside, but it was empty of possible killers. Maybe the 2 I'd seen out front hadn't been bad guys or had anything to do with us at all. If they were, wouldn't they have had someone in the alley? I hoped I was right, but didn't mind taking the precaution on our way to the hotel. Scott asked, what if someone gets into the penthouse and listens to the messages? Won't they be able to track down this Brad Stawalski too? I used the touch tones on the phone to erase the messages last night. Somebody could have already gotten them, Scott said. They wouldn't be expecting us to get calls. I don't want our only option to be total paralysis based on fear. We just had to be extremely cautious. We grabbed a cup of coffee from the Rock and Roll McDonald's on Ontario Street. We parked on Kinsey Street, west of Wells, right behind the Merchandise Mart. We walked east to Dearborn and up to the Hotel Chicago. The Hotel Chicago was the newest, most exclusive, and most modern hotel in Chicago. It was just north of the Hotel Nico and across from Marina City. How are we going to meet him without alerting our pursuers? Scott asked. Simple, I said. I checked my watch. We'll set up a rendezvous point. Then instead of being there to meet him, we'll shadow him and see if anybody is stalking him. If they are, we'll call it off. Won't they be just as likely to kill him as they did Glenn? Scott asked. I hope he's not dead yet, although I'm sure he's in danger, but we've got to try. In the lobby, we found the payphones. First, I called the penthouse. Glenn had another message from Brad. He said he'd be in his room from 10 to 12 and then would be checking out. He sounded extremely frightened. I relayed the information to Scott. He still doesn't know Glenn's dead? Scott asked. Hard to tell, I said. I think you better call him. He'll recognize your voice. I'm hoping he'll trust you enough to meet us. Do I tell him about Glenn? Not yet, I said. This time someone in the room picked up the phone. I listened to Scott introduce himself. I caught the syncopated effect of listening to one half of a phone conversation. This is Scott Carpenter. I'm calling for Glenn Proctor. He's in trouble. He wants you to meet him on the steps of the Art Institute at 11. Michigan and Adams. Big building. Takes up most of the block. On the east side of the street. I can't tell you over the phone. We'll talk when we meet. He hung up. Our Brad isn't an art lover, I said. Never heard of the place, Scott said. He may not be too bright, but he knows enough that he should be scared. Now what? He still hasn't been captured or spotted, or he'd have suffered Glenn's fate. What if they're using him as bait to get to us? Scott asked. We're reversing the process. If someone is after him, we follow him and them. We can follow them back to their source, but he's got to still be free of them. They wouldn't let him live. What if they try to kill Brad? Scott asked. Do we let them and then follow them to get ourselves killed? We should tell the cops about this Brad guy and let them question him. We can make a call to Quinn. He can follow up. As we talked, I maneuvered so we could see the elevators. What crime is it that we be reporting? I asked. That this guy left a message for Glenn on our machine? That is not a violation of criminal statutes as far as I can tell. Won't they want to talk to anyone who can give them information about Glenn's death? Scott asked. Brad probably thinks he's alive. According to the cops, he's not dead. Remember? Maybe they think we're the ones who have fallen afoul of some criminal organization for reasons that we are unable or unwilling to tell them. What if he just skips town and doesn't go to the Art Institute? Scott asked. If this doesn't work, we'll try something else. Maybe you could come up with an idea that keeps us safe. As the cops take us seriously and solves Glenn's murder. I'd be happy to hear any suggestions. I surprised myself with my vehemence and sarcasm. I'm sorry, Scott began. Then an extremely muscular man with slicked black back hair, wearing running shoes, blue jeans, and a sweatshirt, walked off the elevator. He headed straight for the door and turned south. That's him, Scott said, and began to follow. Wait, I said. I let my eyes rove over the characters seated in the lobby. 2 men in business suits chatted near the potted palm. One in a Ralph Lauren warm-up suit strode toward the elevators. A couple in their late teens or early 20s talked earnestly with blue-rinsed matron. Perhaps their grandmother or a maiden aunt. A bellhop moved a flat car of luggage toward the street. No one seemed to take any notice of us or Brad Stawalski. Certainly no one wearing sunglasses and toting a machine gun burst out from behind a pillar and started spraying the lobby with unpleasantness. I waited another minute, then we spun through the revolving doors. The doorman at the curb asked if we needed a cab. I spotted Brad on foot at the midpoint on the bridge crossing over the Chicago River. I told the doorman no on the cab. We moved a few steps away from the door. I turned to Scott and said, Let's pretend we're having a pleasant, casual conversation. Each of us carefully looks over the parked cars and pedestrians in our view. What are we looking for? Anything that looks remotely suspicious. Several minutes. Observation revealed nothing. We'll lose him if we wait much longer, Scott said. I looked toward the river. Stawalski had reached the red light at Wacker Drive. I could tell he wasn't a native Chicagoan because he waited for the light to change before he began to cross. Good Chicago street crossers, if they see the slightest chance to take a step or two ahead, are already well off the curb and daring traffic. Glancing at my watch, I saw we had nearly half an hour before the appointed time. Brad seemed in no particular hurry, although he checked every corner and looked back several times to see whether he was being followed. We crossed to the east side of the street, strolled easily, and kept to shadows and gazed in windows, doing everything but holding hands to show that we couldn't possibly be following him. As we crossed Randolph Street, he disappeared to our west on the further side of the Daily Center. He had turned the wrong direction for the Art Institute. We poked along until we could see through the glass in the Daily Center to the plaza with the enormous Picasso statue of whatever it was supposed to be. I spotted Stawalski among the tourists gapping at the construction. We continued on past the plaza while Brad lingered to gawk. The autumn sky was gray, but the day had warmed up and the wind was calm. We walked with our jackets open. I guided us west on Washington Street until we were halfway through the next block, with City Hall bulking large on our right. We crossed the street and ambled back. All the while, I kept my eye out for anyone too interested in Brad. So far, nothing. We hung around the Miro sculpture and watched Brad stare at pigeons for a few minutes until he moved south on Dearborn once more. We watched everybody who fell in behind him for the next few minutes, even the people on cross streets, and as well as we could, those in cabs and cars. We saw nothing suspicious. We moved back to Dearborn. We strode past the First National Bank building, the Chagall Wall, crossed Monroe Street, past the Xerox Center to Adams Street, where Brad turned east toward the Art Institute. We crossed to the south side of Adams and followed the mid-morning Monday crowds were thick enough so that we easily blended in. Brad now rarely checked to see if he was being followed. We crossed State Street and then Wabash Avenue. As we neared Michigan, Brad slowed perceptibly, then ducked into the Burger King on the corner of Adams and Michigan. I pulled Scott into the alley between Wabash and Michigan Avenue. "Let's meet him in the Burger King," I said. "We haven't seen anybody the least bit suspicious, except maybe ourselves and him. He'll recognize you, so he won't be inclined to run." This is good enough. Inside, Brad sat at a corner table with a soft drink in front of him. Most of the time, he watched the steps of the Art Institute across Michigan Avenue. He didn't notice us until our shadows fell across his line of vision. He leaped to his feet and he stared at me, then caught sight of Scott and gave him a weak smile. Scott introduced us. We all shook hands and sat down. "What is going on?" Brad asked. "I've been trying to get a hold of Glenn. When I call his dad's place, they won't give me any information. I called the number he gave me to get a hold of him. That must have been you guys." Scott nodded. "What is going on?" Brad repeated. "Glenn is dead," Scott said. "He can't be," Brad said. "It's not possible. He finally had everything together. He'd made his last deal. He was going to stop living on the edge." Scott told him what we'd found. Brad shook his head. "It can't be. Why didn't they tell me when I called the house?" Scott explained what we knew about the situation in the Proctor home. "This is crazy," Brad said. "You say you saw him?" "I saw the bullet holes," I said. "I touched the body." Scott nodded confirmation. Brad pointed at me. "Who are you?" "Scott introduced you, but you're not a baseball player, although you've got the build for it." "Scott and I are lovers." Brad stared at Scott. "I heard the rumors you were gay. I want you to know I never believed them. I never spread them." "What's important now," Scott said, "is figuring out who killed Glenn, who was after us, and from the way you've been acting, who is after you." "Yeah," he said. "Something screwy is going on. Just after I crossed the border back into the United States, a bunch of guys with guns seized the bus from Mexico. I could have been on it, but I decided to drive over and see a former girlfriend of mine in Houston. Then fly up from there. From what you told me about Glenn, I'm glad I wasn't on that bus." "Were you and Glenn traveling together in Mexico?" I asked. "Yeah," Brad said, "but you didn't come back together?" Scott asked. "Glenn thought we shouldn't," Brad said. "You said he made his last deal and that he was going to stop living on the edge?" "What deal?" I asked. Brad gave a shrug of his massive shoulders, scratched his slick black hair, and glanced fearfully out the window. "I don't know if I can tell," Brad said. "Why not?" Scott asked. "It's real complicated." Brad eyed each passer-by suspiciously, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped sweat from his forehead and above his lip. "You're really scared," I said. "Glenn was supposed to call the cops," Brad said. "He was going to arrange protection." "What was going on in Mexico?" Scott said. "I'm scared," Brad said. "I hate being in this public place." We debated briefly about where to go. Brad suggested his hotel room. I vetoed that as too dangerous. I didn't want Brad to know where our temporary refuge was. Scott suggested my lawyer's office. I called, but got his answering machine at work and at home. Finally, I said, "I know the perfect place." I saw an empty cab at the corner waiting for the light. "Follow me," I ordered. I dashed out of the restaurant, flung open the cab door. As we piled in, I did a quick reconnaissance of the nearby populace. An art student hurried by with her 4x4-foot flat leather case for carrying artwork. A group of 15 kids with 2 adults in tow ascended the steps of the Art Institute. Several young couples walked hand in hand up the steps. Various sets of tourists and art lovers had marched in and out of the museum, none of them carrying dangerous weapons, wearing snarling faces, or approaching us as nefarious characters. In the cab, I said, "North Clark Street, just south of Diversey." "Where are we going?" Brad asked. "Safest place I know of in the city," I said. "No one would think to look for us there." The Womb was the sleaziest bar in the city. It was on Clark Street, south of Diversey, across from the post office. The bar was in the basement of a crumbling building. The color scheme, which had changed numerous times over the years, had been returned to lurid tints, generally suggesting walls spray-painted with vomit. The entertainment used to be lesbian strippers in leather. Now dancing boys performed in skimpy outfits. They alternately gyrated slender hips on a tiny stage to the rear of the bar, or circumnavigated the central well, shaking down customers for tips. The joint had a grisly reputation for prostitution, somewhat of a higher class notoriety for transvestites, transsexuals, and other transgender folks. Plus, it had underground nationwide fame for its after-hours parties, rumored to be filled with vast quantities of illegal drugs, gallons of booze, and lack of clothes on the partygoers. It matched our hotel as one of the last places I could think of that anyone would look for us. I knew it would be open because they served a daily brunch. It was a lavish spread with over 50 different kinds of salads, cold pasta dishes, a plethora of meats, fruits, and vegetables. You could get omelets, waffles, and pancakes freshly made to your order, after which you could indulge in an enormous variety of desserts, heavily weighted on the chocolate end of the spectrum. It was just after noon when we walked in. The first bartender I saw was dressed in a purple pure silk full shirt with double pleats in back and very full long sleeves. He had on black gym shoes with bright yellow socks and black 2Xist boxer briefs. He was among the more conservatively dressed of the staff. The cook at the omelet table wore a red chef's hat and a single black strap of cotton around his neck, which tapered down and connected to a contoured pouch. He also wore a carnation behind one ear. Both these guys had lean, muscular figures that looked terrific in their outfits. The Monday noon crowd filled half the place. When we were 2 feet inside the front door, Brad said, "What is this place?" "A haven," I said. We asked for and received a seat at a booth near the back. Moments later, our waiter appeared in sheer silvery short and robe. He gave us some tips on specials, flirted with the three of us shamelessly, and sashayed away. Brad shook his head. "Is this a gay bar?" he asked. I glanced around. "It's more of a hallucination," I said, "but it grows on you." As we perused the buffet table, the dancing boy left the stage at the far end of the room and pranced over to us. He seemed aptly dressed in a gold-banded thong. Another few beers and his figure would no longer be appropriate for this outfit. Maybe they only had the second-string guys gyrating at Monday lunch. Brad made shooing motions at the dancer, but I knew the drill. I stuck a buck in his pouch, and he left us alone. I picked up a broccoli and cheese omelet and a Caesar salad, along with some onion soup. Scott found the appetizer, finger food that he liked so much, and loaded up. Brad stuck to waffles. After I'd consumed enough to take the edge off my hunger, I said, "We've got big problems, Brad. You said you were scared, and Glenn had made some kind of deal. What's going on?" We spoke in soft voices, although the size of the booth, the distance we were from any other patron, and the sounds of music for the dancers wafting over hidden speakers were sufficient to mute anything we said. "How can I be sure I can trust you?" Brad asked. Scott said, "We can't be sure we can trust you either. We've been shot at. You're scared. Who are you planning to turn to if not us?" Brad's immediate response was to wolf down huge quantities of waffle while glancing anxiously around the room. A Nick Bakes poster on the wall next to the booth was of a young blonde lying in bed, with his pajama tops open and the bottoms unbuttoned enough to reveal white briefs. I always thought it looked like Scott when we first met. I think he's even more beautiful now. Scott broke the silence. "We've got no choice but to trust each other," as he explained that the police didn't believe us about Glenn's death. Brad finished his waffle and took several enormous gulps of coffee. Immediately, the waiter appeared and refilled the mug. He rested a hand on Brad's shoulder and leaned a hip more than companionably close. He finished his onerous duty and sauntered off. "I don't know if I can take this place," Brad said. "We could all be dead if we don't do something," I said. "We've got to know what the hell was going on. You've got that information." Like Scott said, "Who are you going to turn to?" "I don't know," Brad said. "We were down there together. We didn't plan for it to happen." "What?" I demanded. Brad mumbled, "Drugs." "I knew it!" I said. It was such a stupid cliche thing for Glenn Proctor to involve himself in. Illegal drug trafficking. He double-crossed somebody and got himself killed. What kind of drugs? I asked, almost bored. Not kinds of drugs, Brad said. Drug people. We had a line on where Federico Torres was hiding. Everybody knew from the headlines that Federico Torres was the most powerful drug kingpin in Mexico. Huge numbers of police officials in 12 countries and millions of dollars had been spent hunting for him. He had eluded numerous police dragnets and was wanted by the authorities in half the countries in the world, not only for illegal substances, but for his involvement in assassination and gun running as well. He's got a price on his $7 million on his head, Brad said. Glenn found out where he was and was determined to cash in. He lost all the money he made in baseball. This was his way of showing his dad he could make it on his own and that he'd kicked his drug habit for good and was making up for it. He knew where Federico was. I was going to help Glenn turn him in. We were going to split the money. But something went wrong near Huatla in Mexico. Why didn't you just call the police? I asked. We were going to, but we didn't know which cops to trust. Glenn suggested we give the information to cops in this country. He decided we should split up. He came a day ahead. I think he had a meeting with somebody at the airport in Acapulco. But he wouldn't tell me. He gave me a number to call when I got here, which I guess was you guys. I flew out of Mexico City to Ciudad Victoria. Brad wiped his palm across his brow. I didn't think his nervousness was from being turned on by the dancing boy, the hired help, or the decor. On the way to Mexico City, I drove by the place where 24 Mexicans were killed in an ambush. There's a lot of drug traffic through that region. I think I was lucky to get out of there alive. I knew I shouldn't have gotten involved with Glenn. He always had the goofiest schemes. Are you sure he wasn't trying to smuggle drugs? I asked. Brad looked down at the table, pawed at his hair again, and looked sideways at us. He wasn't. I went through his luggage and my own in case he tried to stuff some in that I didn't know about. You knew him pretty well, Scott said. I know I'm not bright, but I've been around enough to recognize Glenn's type. How'd you get involved with him? I asked. I was in Ciudad Victoria, doing some preparation for the winter baseball leagues. I'm a sort of coach and player. It's the only place I can still play. Nobody else wants me. My knee's a little gimpy from an operation. Glenn came through a few weeks ago. He suggested a vacation together. It was nice seeing a guy I could talk to and understand. I'm not prejudiced, you understand, but at least he spoke English. Besides, Glenn always was a good guy to party with. How'd he stumble onto the drug lord's whereabouts? I asked. I'm not sure, Brad said. Glenn didn't explain much to me. He just wanted my help. Did he know before he ran into you? I asked. Brad thought a minute. I don't think so. He didn't start talking about it until the day we left Cuernavaca for Acapulco. That was 5 days ago. Why did he need your help? I asked. I'm not sure. I think I was supposed to be like sort of a bodyguard. You have no idea what happened? I asked. Only a little. I know he was sending the information about the drug guy's whereabouts here and not bringing it with him. I got nervous and figured I'd better get out of the country for a while. At the Mexico City airport, I thought I was being followed. I had a scheduled stop in Ciudad Victoria. While there, I checked in at my place to pick up a few things. My neighbor told me that some mean-looking dudes were looking for me at the airport gate. I saw the guy who I thought was following me in Mexico City. I don't think he saw me. I turned around and left. A friend agreed to drive me as far as Brownsville, Texas. I just wanted to get back to the United States as quick as I could and get hold of Glenn. Brownsville is where I saw the bus I would have been on, boarded by guys with guns. The waiter returned and sidled up to our booth. His song came up to about the edge of our table. In an incredibly deep bass voice, he asked, "Is everything satisfactory?" Brad said, "Get the hell out of here, faggot!" The young man drew himself up to his full fairy fury. I forestalled a confrontation. Much as the young man didn't deserve to be treated harshly, I wasn't in the mood for confrontation. I echoed Brad's sentiments, but with a more friendly dollar bill tucked into his G-string and pat on the ass. To Brad, I said, "Keep your homophobia to yourself. If you're going to get out of this, it's going to be because of us." "I should call the cops," Brad said. "I don't even know what homophobia is." "Call them," I said. Brad hesitated. He went through his head, scratching routine again. "I could tell them I think Federico Torres is after me and that his men killed Glenn." "What proof are you going to give them?" I asked. "That they killed Glenn." "We have no body and no proof of that," I said. "But they attacked you. And you don't like us, so you're going to call the police and use an attack on us as a way to get protection for yourself. Does that really make sense to you? Do you think they'll buy your story?" "They have to," Brad said. "Don't they?" "Your trust in the local constabulary is quaint, but misguided," I said. "They can't just come into this country and kill people," Brad said. "We've got laws against that." I was polite enough not to laugh at him. Now that we had information from him about who was probably chasing Glenn, I wasn't sure how much good he was to us. I didn't want this homophobic creep hanging around who we might have to protect or save. I also wasn't sure what he could do with the information. I wanted to shower and shave, meet with Mrs. Proctor, talk with my lawyer, and be safe in my own home. The immediate questions were how to be safe and how to handle Brad. I could easily see him getting himself killed by doing something stupid. "Homophobic means I don't like gay people," Brad said, apropos of nothing. Scott nodded. Brad shook his head. "I just don't like being in this place," Brad said. "I'm liberal in bars and the minor leagues. I even met a few guys who I let give me blowjobs. Doesn't mean I'm gay or that I hate you guys. Just this place gives me the creeps." I glanced around as someone unaccustomed to the more flamboyant side of gay life. It could be a little difficult to take. The atmosphere was like the most outrageous parts of the Pride Parade, the ones they usually show on television or on hate videos put out by the religious right. Scott said, "We should call Todd again." So I did. His answering service told me to hold on. He must have left a message to page him immediately if we called. After I explained everything to him, Todd said, "Does Brad know where Federico is?" "I don't know," I said. "We never asked him." "You don't want to know?" Todd said. "Don't let him tell you the place. He's got to get himself to the authorities immediately. Go from where you are to the nearest police station and stay there, no matter what. That's the 23rd District at Halstead and Addison. I will bring reinforcements." "What'd you find out about old man Proctor's business?" I asked. "No time now. Immediately get him to the police station." I walked back to the table. Brad wasn't there. "In the John." Scott answered my unspoken question. "He didn't want an escort," I asked. "He said he could handle it." I motioned for our waiter, who came over, leaned up next to me, and whispered in my ear, "I'd love to take you home, if neither of these guys is your lover." "Thanks. I'm spoken for," I said. Scott hadn't been recognized by anyone in the bar, or if he had, they'd kept a discreet distance. Going out with him can be a hellish experience. Get one fan who recognizes him, and you could have a maelstrom of screaming lunatics around you in seconds. Other times he manages to slip by completely unrecognized. Last year he dragged me to the Chicago Auto Show, the biggest one in the country. We'd walked around for 2 hours, and he was completely unrecognized. I paid the check and sat on the edge of the booth to wait for Brad. The dancing boy was immediately upon me. I had sat spread-legged with both knees jutting into the aisle. He chose to deposit himself on my right knee and proceeded to make his pouch jump and jiggle on my thigh. For my dollar, I got a hug and a whispered, "Thank you." He smiled and moved on to his next victim. "It's so nice they're friendly," Scott said. "Hell of a way to make a living," I said. "I wonder if they have real jobs." "Ask them sometime," Scott said. "I'm not sure I care that much." "Brad's taking a long time," Scott said. I leaned out of the booth and looked toward the back and the washrooms. "I hope he didn't get lost or molested," I said. "I'm going to check," Scott said. I scanned the crowd. A tall, beefy guy and a short, thin guy with a wispy mustache lounged near the door. Undercover cops or I began to feel uneasy. A moment later, Scott hurried up to our table. "He's gone," Scott announced. "What do you mean gone? He can't be gone." "I mean gone as in no longer at this place in this universe," Scott said. I needed sarcasm at this moment. I nodded discreetly in the direction of the suspicious guy near the front. "Did Brad see them?" "I don't know when they came in." "Come on," I said. We both rushed to the back. Together we checked both Johns, empty. A third door led off from the hallway with the washrooms. I pushed it open. The room was set up like 100 dressing rooms and tawdry theaters, a mirror with a row of lights around the perimeter, cramped quarters with clothes strewn everywhere, racks of clothes against the walls. A dancing boy sat in a tatty flannel bathrobe, a cigarette dangling from his lips while he perused a textbook whose title read Sociology of Groups in the Wild. He glanced up at us. "You're not supposed to be back here, but for you, I'll make an exception. I charge extra for 2 at the same time." "We're looking for the guy who was sitting with us," I said. "Kind of a big, beefy guy. Did he come around here?" The dancer drew his robe closer around himself. "I remember him. Haven't seen him, but I've been on break only a couple minutes. You'll have to ask Charlie." "Where's he?" I asked. The dancer nodded his head toward another door further back. Through this we strode. This room was maybe 8 by 8, with a large metal desk in the middle, 3 filing cabinets against the far wall, and a door to our right. A fat man smoking a cigar gave us a brief glance. He wore a t-shirt with holes in it. A ledger book was open in front of him. He wrote several figures into it, then raised an eyebrow in our direction. "I got a license," he said. "Or if you want the cops or the city inspector. I don't provide the dancing boys for prostitution. I run a clean place here. I can't get you any favors." "Did a big guy with greased down hair go through here a few minutes ago?" I asked. "No, I'm busy. You don't belong here. Leave." I marched over and opened the far door. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" the fat guy lumbered over. I ignored him and peered it out into an alley. I saw no sign of Brad. The fat man grabbed my arm. I shook him off and said, "Is there any other way out of here?" "Fuck off, buddy." Obviously, he wasn't going to win Miss Congeniality of this alley. I looked over my shoulder at Scott. "You sure he didn't go out the front?" "Positive," he said. "Get out of here," the fat guy roared. "Okay," I said. We walked out the back door. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.